Registered nurse teacher Shelly Stuart is busy spreading the word about gluten intolerance. She has it, she blogs about it, and is on a mission to educate doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals, and people who suffer from celiac disease and have no idea they even have it. It is my pleasure to welcome Shelly Stuart to Studio 4 to tell us more.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Fanny.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
You are a registered nurse.
Yes.
You'd think if you had celiac disease, you'd know.
I know, and unfortunately, I trained 21 years ago, and there was very little training about celiac disease during my training. I think it was about 5 minutes, and we just covered the classic symptoms, and it was presented as a childhood disease. So we now know that celiac disease can affect adults, and sometimes the symptoms don't even present until someone is in their senior years.
Really? So
Yes.
you're not born with it?
That's right. So it can present at any age.
What is it?
Celiac disease is an autoimmune condition. It's a permanent autoimmune condition. And when people who have celiac disease eat gluten, which is in wheat, rye, barley, and some types of oats, their immune system reacts not only to the gluten in those foods, but also their immune system cross-reacts and causes damage in the bowel, and specifically to the intestinal villi, which are finger-like projections, just like your fingers. In the bowel. You have millions of them, and they're responsible for absorbing food and nutrients. Well, with celiac disease, the immune system cross-reacts and damages the villi so that they flatten and become dysfunctional. And what happens because of that, you can have multiple nutrient deficiencies that can cause symptoms throughout the body. Now, in addition to the malabsorption issues, you can also have the antibodies can cross-react with other tissues in the body, so you can get symptoms throughout the body. And that's with celiac disease. There's 2 other forms of gluten intolerance.
Okay, so how many types of
3.
celiac? 3 types.
3 types of gluten intolerance. Celiac disease is one type, and dermatitis herpetiformis is another type.
Great.
Yes, that's
That sounds serious.
Yes.
What's that? Or is it too complicated?
Well, it's a skin form of celiac disease, and they say that it's like celiac disease because about 80% of people with dermatitis herpetiformis have the bowel damage as well.
Right.
About 20% do not have the bowel damage. However, they may still have immune activity happening in the villi. They're just not actually flattened.
And the outward symptoms would be rashes?
The symptom is typically an itchy, blistering rash. However, some people present with like eczema type of appearance, or psoriasis, mosquito bites. Some people present with a recurrent, it looks like hives. So there's a lot of misdiagnosis that can occur with it. And, but it responds well to a gluten-free diet.
Okay, and the 3rd type?
The 3rd type is a non-celiac gluten intolerance. Now, with this subgroup, people react to the gluten, but they don't have the bowel damage the celiac disease has. So that's the difference.
So they might just be bloated or...
Right, they can still have all the gastrointestinal, all the bowel symptoms, but they just don't have the bowel damage.
Right, so they're still absorbing the good
right.
stuff.
They're still absorbing. However, now the symptoms may just be from the fact that the gluten is sitting undigested in the bowel, because gluten is not an easy protein to digest. There are studies out there that suggest that we don't have all the digestive enzymes that we need to digest gluten properly, and that's why it can be a problem for so many people.
And when did you know? How did you find out you had it? What were your early symptoms? Let's start there.
Sure. Well, in my childhood, I was always very thin. I was tall. You can have short stature because of the malabsorption, but not necessarily, because I was tall, but thin. I would get stomach aches, indigestion sometimes, and then when I was a teenager, I was having problems with anemia that would come and go. And my symptoms were very vague throughout my life. Up to almost half of celiacs can have no symptoms at all. So the symptoms can be very, very vague, or they can be very pronounced. As time progressed, I had 3 children, and the pregnancies seemed to really bring on my symptoms, so they were more pronounced after my pregnancies. And then, of course, I I started getting irritable bowel type of symptoms.
Right.
So my symptoms became much more pronounced, but still I was misdiagnosed with irritable bowel for about 5 years. And then I became quite sick and started losing weight. And my mom came out to visit me and took care of my children so I could do some research. And I came across celiac disease and tried a gluten-free diet, and it worked.
It worked how?
It took all of my gastrointestinal symptoms away.
Wow.
Now, the arthritic symptoms took longer. Night blindness from vitamin A deficiency took longer. But the gastrointestinal symptoms resolved almost right away. So I went to a gastroenterologist, and he confirmed through an endoscopy and biopsies that I had celiac disease.
Is that the test you need to have if you suspect you have a problem, or are there other tests? Blood tests?
Yes, there's a variety of blood tests, Fanny. I have them all outlined in the book. There's about 12 different tests that I've outlined. There's a number of different blood tests. Some are more specific to celiac disease. Some are for the non-celiac gluten intolerance. The endoscopy with multiple biopsies, at least 6 or more, is specific for celiac disease. And dermatitis herpetiformis, they do biopsies of the skin.
What if you just suspect you have it? So you go on a gluten-free diet, or you just don't feel so good, so you go gluten-free.
Right.
I'm sure there's a good gluten-free diet and a not-so-good gluten-free diet, but to eliminate those grains, you said wheat, barley.
Wheat, rye, and barley, and some types of oats.
Some types of oats.
Yes.
You have to obviously replace that with something that works for you, or that's healthy, so you're not missing out on some of the good things. Those grains can give the body.
Yes, that's right. Now, one thing I just wanted to point out, though, before we talk about the nutritional aspects of the gluten-free diet is that it's very important to get the testing before you go gluten-free, because a gluten-free diet can cause false negative test results. Because, of course, as soon as you start eating gluten-free, all your antibody levels start to decrease.
Oh, so go when you don't feel so good.
That's right.
To make sure you have that before you start doing your own thing.
That's right. That's right. So that, and unfortunately, only about 3% of celiacs are diagnosed. And
I read that in here, and I thought 3%. So 95 or 97% of people walking around have celiac and don't know.
That's right. So there is a lot of self-diagnosing that's happening, unfortunately, because of the lack of awareness. And as what happened to me, it did put me at risk when I started eating gluten-free first, because I could have had a false negative test result. So it's so important that doctors and nurses become aware of the symptoms, and so that it's on their radar when they're diagnosing and looking at patients. But,
and when you go to the doctor and he or she says you have a nervous reaction, or it's stress, or perhaps you need a Tums, you can perhaps suggest
you can suggest
that what if I'm gluten intolerant?
That's right. That's right. And then talk to the doctor about those tests. And I suggest take my book right with you and show the doctor. I have 100 pages of research in the references.
Right.
And so you can show the doctor all of the studies that have been done.
And what does it have to do with yeast infections, things like that? A link or not?
Yes, definitely. When you have a gluten intolerance, the microbiota of your bowel may not be the same, so it can make you more prone to getting gastrointestinal or bowel infections. So that could be bacterial infections, yeast infections, fungal, which is fungal, and you can get parasitic infections as well more easily. Okay,
so now, your diet today.
Yes, my diet today is fabulous.
Obviously no wheat, barley, rye, and certain types of oats. What do you eat?
Well, I primarily focus on fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, meat, seafood, eggs, that kind of thing. The type of foods, I really try to focus on the type of foods that we used to eat as hunter-gatherers, because I think that those foods are the most easy to digest and quite healthy. We really didn't introduce grass into our diet until about 10,000 years ago, which is like yesterday in our evolutionary history. So our bodies, from the studies that I've looked at, they suggest that we don't have all the digestive enzymes necessary to digest grass, because it just has been introduced too soon in our evolutionary history.
But a grass-fed cow, grass-fed beef, okay?
Yes.
Because it's turned into beef.
That's right.
I
Yes,
see. So the
right,
cow
yes.
digested it.
The cow digested it. Cow has 4 stomachs to digest it,
I
too.
know. Absolutely. So really, it's more of a Mediterranean diet. You can have oils, things like that.
Yes,
What about
yes.
hidden glutens in product?
Oh,
Do you read all the labels? You
everywhere.
must.
Yes, yes. You have to read all the labels and to make sure, and you have to know all the keywords. There's like several keywords to make sure that your food is not cross-contaminated. You can buy kits as well to test your food if you like, and it will test for the presence of gluten.
But Shelly, what would happen to you if today you ate a muffin?
I would get very, very sick. I would get the gastrointestinal, the bowel symptoms, bloating, diarrhea, running to the bathroom, abdominal discomfort, also foggy headedness, because gluten intolerance can affect your cognitive function as well. Some people feel very foggy headed. It can cause learning problems. There have been people who have been diagnosed with ADHD who also have celiac disease or gluten intolerance. So it's important to recognize that gluten intolerance can affect all the systems of the body. I've had arthritis with it as well in my hip and my
Arthritis, so
shoulder.
it's inflammation?
Yes, inflammation in my joints. So that can happen as well. So a headache can happen with it too. That would be the type of symptoms that I would experience, but someone else may not experience that at all. They may just experience a tiny bit of bloating or a headache.
So you could be slightly intolerant, like in any kind of disorder or disease. You can have a slight case or a major case. Would that be true?
That's right.
When
It's
celiac?
just like with food allergies as well. Some people with peanut allergies get a rash. Some people have anaphylaxis. It can vary quite a bit with gluten intolerance.
Sure,
too.
and often you crave what you're not supposed to have.
That's right.
In food,
Yes.
especially food allergies.
That's right.
So if you're just want to have a whole loaf of bread, you might look at that. You might look at that.
That's right. Some people avoid it. I naturally tended to avoid those foods because they sat heavy in my stomach. But some people crave those foods.
Right.
And I did want to mention when we're talking about diet too, there's many other types of foods and flours that are gluten-free, like potato flour, tapioca, and nut flours. It's just, there's a lot more than the types of foods that I just
Sure,
focus
not
on.
just rice flour and
So
all
you
of that,
know.
because you can get gluten-free pasta now,
That's
gluten-free
right.
cookies, all of that. So you
Cakes.
don't have to walk around deprived.
That's right. That's
And you're
right.
teaching nurses about this, I'm sure, because you're now instructing as a clinical nurse.
I am a clinical nurse educator, so I do teach nurses new skills, nurses that have already graduated. I work within the hospital, but I also am a gluten intolerance consultant as well within my own company, Stuart Healthcare Solutions.
Great. Okay, so the mysterious symptoms be gone. If that's what it is, how wonderful, because anything that flies under the radar, it's good to know about. I thought this would be like a tiny book. When my producer gave it to me, I thought, oh, a little book on gluten toxicity, and it's a tome.
Yes.
So your blog is celiacnurse.com?
That's correct.
People can ask you questions?
They can.
All of that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice to meet
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shelly Stuart, registered nurse, gluten toxicity, her book, The Mysterious Symptoms of, you say celiac?
Yes.
Celiac disease, dermatitis, oh no.
Herpetiformis.
Herpetiformis, and non-celiac gluten intolerance.